Doing well by doing good. Today on Behind the Book, we are interviewing Mike Brown, president of Trico Homes. Let's jump in. Welcome to Behind the Book, where I am your guide, Heather Andrews, unraveling the captivating stories from behind the pages. Join me as I sit down with authors from the literary landscape to delve into challenges, inspirations, and untold tales that breathe life into their written worlds. Welcome to this episode of Behind the Book. We are talking with Mike Brown, president of Trico Homes today. Welcome, Mike.
Welcome. Thank you.
Yes, it's so good to have you. Yeah.
Pleasure to be here.
So when we talk about doing well by doing good, can you just give us a little bit of a backstory on what that means to you?
Well, I can tell you what it means to me, and I can tell you the backstory too at the same time. So for me, it's about, it's a greater purpose. You can oftentimes get focused on revenue and just revenue. And I know it's become fashionable today for companies to say we're more community oriented, but with Trico, we are truly community oriented. Mm-hmm. It's really about the community first, and then it's about us second. And if you look at it, if you look after your community, you'll be looked after. That's the simplest way to look at it for me. Now the backstory is, if you go a little farther back, is I asked Wayne Chu, our founder, I said, like, when did you start thinking that way? When did you, and he told me a story about sitting after graduation from university, and everybody goes around the table, as we all do, and they're going around the table, and it's like, I'm gonna make this much money, I'm gonna make this much money, I'm gonna make this money, and Wayne essentially, in his words, said, I'm gonna make a difference. And everybody around the table was like, why? Why do you think that way? And he's always thought that way. I like to think I've always thought that way, and it's really about putting the community we live and work in first, and in doing so, recognize you're going to be successful.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And we often sometimes, I like when you say sitting around the table and I'm going to go out and do this, and I'm going to go make that, and I'm going to have this house, but I want to make a difference.
Yeah.
And that, I think, has really been a real shift in companies' focus as we've moved into culture, and it being a really big shift with our millennials and that next generation coming up.
Absolutely.
And I think that takes us into the next question of, what does culture mean to you? Because when you started writing in our Culture Revolution book, that was the first question that we posed.
Yeah, culture is, it's interesting because culture is in some ways really tangible, and it's not measurable as per se, like you look at it. But if you walk into an organization or a family or a group of friends, or all those, you can feel that. You can feel if there's a good culture. And what you're feeling is it's empowering. It's actually taking you farther than you are by yourself. If you're in a negative culture, we've all been in those situations where you feel suppressed. You feel like you can't be your true self. And and it's what I find with Trico is our culture is about getting more out of people, having them actually rise and become better and greater than they would just be without it. Yeah. Now the interesting part is that in doing so, you have to allow the people to be authentic. They have to be true to who they are. Yeah. If you go in and say, I want you to behave like this, and I want you to do this, and I want you to do that, you won't get that cultural feel because it's contrived. And it's, as we know, for individuals, it's really hard. If we have to pretend to be somebody, that's very stressful.
Yes.
It's a lot easier if we can just be ourselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. And one of the things that when you wrote in the chapter in Culture Revolution, and it was called Doing Well by Doing Good, one of the things that I never realized, and I'm a local Calgarian, and I've been to Trico Homes, homes and their show homes, and I've heard about them, they're a community pillar in the home industry. And I did not realize until I actually read the chapter, when I finally did the chapter, that Trico actually stands for the value point.
It does, absolutely. And it was interesting, if you go back and reverse back to our early days, Trico as a name was just a name that, Wayne needed a name to get his company going. And then it was kind of like, well, what do we do with this name, and how do we bring some meaning to it? So we actually have it on our wall. We have it all written out, and the staff and themselves, we'll ask them, what does T stand for? It's trust. What does R stand for? Respect. What does I stand for? Integrity. And you go through each of them, and it becomes the tool that we use to help our decision making. I reflect back to when we went through COVID. COVID is a really tough time. It stressed a lot of people out. It was very difficult on team members. It was very difficult as companies. What got us through COVID is the fact that we understood who our values were. We understood where our culture was. It wasn't because everybody else is going to do this, so therefore we're going to do it. It's like, no, we have to actually look at it from ourselves.
Yeah, and really standing firm, not firm, but firm on what that foundation was. And we talked about foundation as well, and it's setting that foundation. So when Wayne created Trico, what was besides the value point, what else did he put to build a strong foundation?
Well, 1993, I'd say there was kind of 2 points that really were instrumental. First off, in 1993, and obviously when you start up a company, you're on your own, it's about survival. And I oftentimes think of the word integrity, and I'm sure at that time his integrity was pressured. In the real estate industry or home building industry or any industry, you've got some good players, you've got some bad players. And I think the choices he made in terms of who he chose to do business with were the players that had like-minded values. But then I go a little further and I look at the early 2000s, I look at mid 2000s. Home building and real estate was doing incredibly well in Calgary. It was booming, and a lot of companies, rightly so, it's their decision. They took that extra profit and they said, we're going to put that into our company. We're going to grow our company more. We're going to, it really became about the company. It became about assets that the company had. Wayne made a decision with his wife Eleanor Chu and said, what we're going to do is we're going to start a foundation, and we're going to actually start investing in post-secondary. We're going to start investing in other parts of the community. And those are, in my mind, those are two pivotal times because, one, at the start off, he could have quickly said, this is about my family, survival. I'm gonna blur the lines a little bit. He didn't do that. And then in the 2000s, it was about, okay, how do we actually continue to give back to the community? Amplify who we are. Most people don't know, and I'm proud of it, all that Wayne and Eleanor have done for the community. Because for them, it's not about getting the recognition, it's more about the impact.
Right.
They were there in the early days of kids' cancer. They were the Trico Center, which was an old established building in Calgary, when a lot of our peers were looking at new buildings to name. They're like, let's name this old building. Those are things to me which I think really speak to the company and speak to Wayne and Eleanor.
Beautiful. I love that. That is such a wonderful way to kind of set the that foundational piece to how they built everything. And they're well known in our community.
Very much so. Very much so. Yeah.
And they've really put a lot of things in, and that's what was so key in that chapter. Yeah. And I know in our initial conversation, you said when you came in, because how long have you been with Trico?
So I've been for Trico 4.5 years.
Right.
Yeah.
And I know when you mentioned that when you came into being the president of Trico, that you didn't really know much about the home industry, and I thought that was a really cool, cool thing.
Yeah, and it was interesting too, because if you think about it, they hired me, and I don't know if I would have hired me based on the experience that I had at the time. Like I was a leader within the real estate industry, but not in the home building industry. But what appealed to them about me was, first of all, my values, and that they aligned, and the fact that they focused in on the values. And they said, the rest of it Mike's going to learn, but we're going to make sure that there's a good values alignment here, and it worked really well for me because at that time I'd been different. In the business community, you get searched for different jobs. People call you up and say, "I'd be interested in this job or interested in that job," and I'd always sit down with my wife and say, "This company's interested in me," or "That company's interested in me," And when I told her about Trico, Suzanne always researched it, and she came back and she says, "No, these guys are very similar to you. Like the company is about the community, and that's who you are. So to go across wasn't really a stretch for me.
Right.
The home building side was a stretch, but the values proposition was very similar."
Well, that's excellent. So what has been the biggest learning curve for you in the home industry versus real estate?
Well, real estate is, so first of all, you oftentimes think of home building as being in real estate, and it truly is, but it's more like manufacturing and the complexity of it. My background, I got an opportunity to work on things like the new Central Library in Calgary. I worked, one of the projects I worked on before that was the Bow Building downtown. So I was like, well, we've done these amazing buildings and I've been a part of it. How different can it be? It's just a house. And what I quickly learned is the complexity is even a lot higher. And it's interesting because even on culture, that complexity can threaten your culture because it'll actually spin you around. On a bigger project, you start it at the front end, you set it up well, and then you execute, and then you clean it up at the back end. On the home building side, it's like you have a plane in the air, you're making changes to the plane, you're adjusting it as you go along, and as you're adjusting as you go along, things are going well, things are not going well, and it's constantly pressuring you in terms of, am I doing the right thing or the wrong thing?
When COVID hit, was there, and all the shipping thing, with the issues with some of the shipping?
There was.
How did that affect Trico?
So there was two parts on COVID. So the first part was when COVID hit, right off the bat, is the belief that no one will ever buy a house ever again. It's like you think in the mindset of the everything got shut down. It's like, oh my God, no one's going to move, no one's going to buy a house. And so at that point in time, it became about our staff. And we went out and did a partnership with the Stoney First Nations in order to ensure that our construction team continued to work. Okay. So that was one of the things we did, and that was all Wayne. It's like we have a responsibility to our team to keep them employed.
Right.
So we did that. Then we went through a phase where after we all were at home, and most people decided that their home no longer worked for them, and so now we're going to buy lots of homes. And so we went from never going to sell a home ever again to we're selling tons of homes to the whole supply chain get messed up. And that was a tough time for us because we had significant demand. We were selling homes like we'd never sold them before, but the supply chains couldn't keep up with the amount of activity that's taking place. And then team-wise, it was interesting because you had team players that essentially had grown up in the industry during a period of time of stability.
Yeah.
So when you suddenly put in a position where there's instability, they don't necessarily have the tools internally of how to deal with the instability. So our culture and our values really did get stretched at that point in time, because it's kind of like, well, why can't you figure out what's going to happen 6 months from now? Why aren't you thinking that way?
Right.
Even with our trades. And now people think that way. Our trades think farther out. But at that time, it was just like they were just in time thinking.
Yeah.
Because it worked for them for 10 plus years.
Absolutely.
And so that was a really difficult time, but it did pressure our culture because we weren't doing as well as we maybe wanted to do as an organization financially. But it also had us kind of inwardly focused and saying, okay, how do we actually position ourselves for the future?
Right. Wow. That is, I did not know about that. The home industry thought that people were never buying homes again.
It was a wild time. It was, and you think about it, like it was interesting with COVID because everything shut down. And we didn't know what the future is going to take.
Yeah.
And so you're kind of, I remember, and different people are at different points. So an established salesperson, when you said, you'd say, well, we need you to go to your show home or be available to sell houses. Somebody that's been in the business for 10, 20, 30 years, they had dealt with adversity. They were like, yeah, no, I want to sell homes. A younger generation of sales was like, no, I'm going to stay home. Because that's what they told us to do. I have to stay home. And you get all these different things that went through during that period of time.
Well, it was interesting when, as a business owner in COVID, I remember we had our big event planned for our publishing company, and it got shut down, and it was like, I lost so much money in the period of a minute. I can't even imagine what other companies did. I just know that was me. And I know during that time, I'm from healthcare, I went back to work because I didn't know what that
you were
was.
Uncertain.
I was uncertain, and I thought, and healthcare is, and healthcare.
That's a primary. It's going to be there no matter what.
And I went back, to working within Alberta Health Services at that time, and it was an interesting time because I'm glad I had that to fall back on and go back to, but. And I also know that within that industry it changed, because we had never seen anything like that.
No. Well, the pressures and the rules. And
exactly.
Construction's an essential service.
Yeah.
So, we'd be open.
Yeah.
So you guys could work, but we had to be mindful of how many people were in a house at one time. We had to, it was a true disruptor.
Yeah.
But I would actually say that we're a better company as a result of that disruption than we were.
Absolutely. I think there was a lot of people that became better because of that.
Yes.
And that's pretty important. So as we wrap up, where can people find you on LinkedIn?
So they can find me is just Google Michael Brown, Trico Homes on LinkedIn, and you'll see me right there, and reach out. I'm always interested to connect with more people.
Excellent, thank you. And as we go from doing well to doing good, we're going to go into the next series called Pushing Too Far. Stay tuned for the next episode of Behind the Book with Mike Brown. As we close another chapter on Behind the Book, I want to extend our heartfelt gratitude to our wonderful authors for sharing their stories. I'm Heather Andrews, reminding you that the adventure doesn't end here. Keep turning those pages, and I will see you next time.